Hoosier Surveyor podcast, brought to you by the Indiana Society of Professional Land Surveyors.
All right, well, this is Ryan Swingley and co-hosted with Ryan Selby.
Hello.
This is the Hoosier Surveyor podcast. We're joined here by Gary Kent, visionary Gary Kent, if you will. I was thinking about that on the way in. The Thanksgiving and the end of year, holidays, closing out business. There's always a reflection towards what the future might hold, and I don't know if very many surveyors have more of a beat on what the future is than Mr. Gary Kent. So we're honored to have him here today. This will be our first interview, if you will.
Yeah.
I see this maybe a little differently than maybe the podcasts you've done in the past. I mean, how many podcasts would you say you've been on?
Not many. Maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5. Probably.
Okay. And I would assume most of those are technical in nature, professional topic in nature. Yeah. And I think we may get to some of that. What I really want, I was walking out the door of my office, and I said, if there was anything you'd want to know about Gary Kent, what would it be? And they said, we want to know how he got his start. So I think we'll get to that. But ultimately, I'm always interested in what people's story is, how they got from point A to point B. And I think it's important, too, as we discuss workforce development, trying to determine where we're finding students that are going to be interested in surveying programs and entering the profession. So I think it's always interesting to know where you start. So I thought we'd go way back to little pre-mustache Gary Kent.
That would have been pre-1979.
So let me put an age on the mustache now.
Older than me. I'm just saying.
So just, tell us a little bit about where you were born, childhood, the elementary years, kind of.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually born in Indianapolis, but my parents moved to Rockford, Illinois when I was, as I recall, not that I recall, but as I understand, when I was just a few months old, literally. We moved to Rockford, Illinois. My dad was in, he was kind of an entrepreneur. He did a lot of different things, but at that time he was doing accounting, and he worked for, I think it was, J.I. Case, or the Case Company. I think that's where he was in Rockford. We were there. I was there through kindergarten, and then we moved to northern Indiana, Rochester. So when I think of growing up, I think of in Rochester. I was there from 1960 to 1967, which would have been first grade to middle of 7th grade. Mm-hmm. And we lived about a block from the lake, and we spent all summer in the creek, in the race, in the lake. There was a federal fish hatchery in Rochester at the time, and we were friends with the manager and his wife, who was actually my 4th grade teacher, and they had 2 sons. So we kind of had the run of the place, and boy, we made good on that.
And what kind of fish were they raising in this fishery?
I actually don't know. They had a number of ponds, and they had a race. They could drain ponds, move them. We were more interested in catching frogs and turtles than we were in knowing exactly. I do remember going in the buildings and seeing the big tanks with fish and stuff.
Right.
But it would have been whatever the federal government was stocking stuff with. So it was probably a variety of things.
Sure.
But it was a great place to grow up. We could ride our bikes. I rode my bike to school. We rode our bikes downtown to the Times Theater, and rode my bike to Little League. It was a great place to grow up.
Right. Back before internet, for some of our listeners, we had to make a lot of our own fun.
We had to make our own fun, and your mom would be out screaming for you to come in, and it was dark, and you were down the block and not hearing, and it was a lot of fun. We moved to Indianapolis in the middle of 7th grade, actually at semester break. And a little known fact that the school I left in Rochester in 7th grade was going to have Indiana history in the second semester. And the school I went to, which was at Pike, had Indiana history in the first semester. So I went 1st grade through 12th grade in Indiana and never took Indiana history.
Is that right?
Which means I'm probably don't have a valid diploma and everything. Everything is. I'm probably in trouble on that.
I think by the time I was coming up, I think Indiana history was taught in 4th grade, I believe. Now I'm not sure, but I remember being heavy in Indiana history in 4th grade.
Yeah, it was very odd because I went to we moved to Pike Township, and I would be in a history class or whatever, and they'd say, "So as you know, Indiana became a state in 1860," and I'm like, "What do you mean? I don't know that. How are you supposed to know that?"
Do you think that drove? You seem to be somewhat of an Indiana historian now. Do you think that drove some of that?
No, I can. We can get to that. I can
Okay.
tell you exactly what drove that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that at the
Okay.
time. I was not a history fan.
Yeah. So what classes were you gravitating to in middle school, high school era?
I loved science. I took in first half of 7th grade up in Rochester. They still taught geography before it got turned into whatever it got turned into, social studies. I loved the geography course. I loved science. Math was a strong suit of mine, although I wasn't all that enamored with it. It just kind of came naturally. So really, science is what I liked.
Yeah. Any industrial arts classes, drafting, anything like that?
No, I took industrial arts at Pike in middle school, and it was okay. I mean, back then we were setting type with little lead type things and setting that and cutting boards and putting things together. But it was okay. It was interesting, but it wasn't something that particularly interested me, I suppose.
Yeah.
When I was in 8th grade, I got my first, I suppose, real job other than delivering papers, which I did in Rochester. I got, through a roundabout way, I got a job at what was Madeira Farm at the time. It was up on the south side of 96th Street, just west of 465, where it comes around that loop at the northwest corner up there. And I worked there for about 4 years, summers and weekends through the year, and that was a spectacular experience. I did everything from painting fences and cutting a whole lot of grass to helping harvest and cutting silage and feeding the cattle, and we had a sale at one point. It was a really, really good experience helping the vet pull calves, because we're Charolais cattle, which are historically the bulls are really big and the cows are big, but not big enough for the calves, and so you end up pulling calves, and it was a huge amount of fun. And I went to Pike High School then.
So what kind of contrast between Rochester and Pike Township? I mean, you're living in the country in Rochester.
Yeah,
and
no way. We lived in the not in the city per se, but we were in town, a mile from or a couple blocks from the lake, and you could ride your bike downtown in 10 minutes. Pike Township at the time when we moved out there, Normandy Farm was actually a farm called Normandy Farm, not a subdivision called Normandy Farm.
Right.
The barn that was there down around the corner from us at Marsh Road and 79th is the one that's at the State Fairgrounds now.
Right. That's a beautiful barn. When you said Normandy, I was obviously clicked.
That's where that came from. We knew the family who managed the farm, the Callahans. They had, 7, 8 kids, and a number of them were firefighters. Difference, yeah, the difference, I could ride my bike downtown in Rochester, in Pike Township if you wanted to go to the grocery. The nearest grocery was at 71st and West Lane Road, which was like a 5-mile drive. You could ride your bike, but you really weren't going to be going anywhere because we were out in the middle of nowhere. We were in a little subdivision between 79th and 86th Streets off Conroe Road. And it was the only thing out that direction at that time. Of course, now it's all subdivided, but it was a lot of fun. We had a little neighborhood of about probably 25 homes, and so had friends there. My best friend lived down the street, and we had a grand time.
Yeah, great. How many siblings did you grow up with? You have any siblings?
I do. I have an older brother and a younger brother, 2 years in between us all.
What do they do?
My older brother was in real estate and mortgages, and then he kind of semi-retired, and he went to work at a hospital. Now he's fully retired, and he loves dabbling around, and so he does handyman stuff. He had a little handyman business going until they moved, and he's down in Jacksonville. My younger brother lives up in Cicero. He has a small business that he does irrigation, maintenance, and that sort of thing, and has done really well with that. He's been doing that for, 10, 15 years now.
So as the middle child, did you consider yourself the peacekeeper or the instigator?
I was not the instigator. No, I was probably the peacekeeper. My brothers, boy, yeah, I remember when my grandparents would come visit. And my younger brother was fond of having a midnight curfew and rolling in at 11:59 and 30 seconds. And I can still remember my grandparents, my dad starting to get agitated because it was 11:55, and my grandparents getting up going, yeah, I think we'll just go to bed now. And then my brother would roll in with literally with seconds to go.
Yeah.
And I think my older brother was about the same way. I was the conscientious one. I rolled in, with 5 minutes to go.
Right. Just like your deadlines, huh? Make sure you're on time. So when did you, as a young kid, elementary school, what were your dreams and aspirations? What did you think? I'm assuming it wasn't a land surveyor. What did you think you wanted to be?
When I was in first grade is when John Glenn flew. And I don't remember this, but I am told that my first grade teacher, Mrs. Wildermuth, everybody was excited. Everybody was just excited about this thing with John Glenn, and I was not excited at all. And she's like, why aren't you excited about this? And apparently I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, because I'm going to be the first man on the moon. I wanted to be an astronaut or a fighter pilot or something, and of course all of that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
I did think about trying to get into the Air Force Academy, but just ended up not. And so that was my goal up until at some point, and when I probably got in, when I realized I wasn't going to become an astronaut. I don't remember that I liked science. That's what I knew.
Mm-hmm. So through the high school years, you're leaning towards some sort of career in science, or?
Yeah, I took Pike had a planetarium. This would have been, and that school was built, I think, in '66 originally. It was probably the only high school planetarium in the state at that time. And I took that class as soon as I could take it. And I took all the physics and chemistry, biology, generally got A's in everything. And I just really liked that. So I love the sciences.
Mm-hmm. When did the idea of land surveying start to emerge?
Land surveying emerged. So I graduated from high school, and I was really not interested in going to a big school. I wanted to go to some smaller school, and at that time, it's a school down in Georgia. Actually, it's in Rome, Georgia, which is where Marjorie Taylor Greene is from. But that's a different topic. A small school called Berry College, and they did a lot of recruiting in Indiana and in New Jersey at the time, of all things. And what I figured out later was that in Indiana they were recruiting basketball players, and in New Jersey they were recruiting baseball players.
Wow, yeah.
In fact, when I was down there, as I recall, at part of the time that year, 5 starters on the basketball team were from Indiana.
Oh, wow.
So I decided I was going to be a physics major, and I went down to Berry College, and I had taken a full year of physics at Pike, which was unusual at that time. Most high schools didn't have physics courses. Mm-hmm. And I got down there, and the first thing they did, of course, is I took a physics course, which was basically a repeat of what I'd already had in high school. So that was not much of a challenge, and I also kind of realized what your options are. Well, it was research or teaching, and those just didn't interest me at all.
Did you try out for the basketball team? At least you got some
I
height
didn't.
on you.
I didn't. I wasn't tall. I don't know when I got taller, but I wasn't tall in high school. But I decided that physics wasn't going to be my thing. I know that the track coach down there, who actually was also from Indiana, I think, tried to recruit me to run 880. It would have been the 800 now, but the 880 at the time, because he was the gym teacher. Right, you had to have a phys ed course, and he saw something in me for running the 880, but I wasn't that interested. I ran some track in high school. I mostly high jumped, and I wasn't interested in running the 880.
So back in those days, did the lean over high jump method was that out by that time? Or
that was out by that time. The roll was still probably the primary. Maybe not primary. It was in major transition. We had one guy on our team who rolled, and we had 2 of us who flopped, and so it wasn't too long after that the Fosbury flop became the really the only way that anybody high jumps anymore.
Yeah.
So I decided that physics wasn't going to be my thing, and I actually also had a girlfriend at Purdue. My grandfather was a civil engineer. He was actually the president of the American Public Works Association in, I think, the year I was born. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I talked to him. My mom thought I should go into engineering. So her father was an engineer. It was her father. So I ended up talking with him, and I had thought about law enforcement, and I thought about engineering. I thought about a number of things, and he's the one who kind of convinced me that engineering might be the thing. So I transferred up to Purdue into civil, and the first course I took was CE 200, which at that time all civil majors had to take a year of surveying. And I took CE 200, and my professor was Warren Marks. And he was a really well-spoken, really smart guy, taught an interesting course, and very well-spoken. I took that course, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, this interests me. And I talked to him, and of course, then I found out that Purdue had a surveying program. And so I went down and talked to John McIntyre, and I changed majors.
So that would have been kind of a fundamentals course, like
it was. It was
equipment.
Fundamentals. Yeah. We ran level circuits, and we turned angles, and we did some calculations. It was fundamentals, and it was before. Well, it wasn't before EDM, but it was, we were using chains and
Right.
that sort of thing.
You remember what kind of gear you were using at that time?
I don't remember if we were using transits or not, but I think we had T1A, and I think there were some T2s and probably some T16s.
Yeah. What year would this been?
This would have been, when I transferred into the program, would have been early 74, probably.
Okay. So you caught the bug, transferred, then what?
Transferred into the surveying program. That was kind of at the height. From 76 to probably early 80s was probably the height of that program. We had probably 25 people in our graduating class. It was fun. We had 4 professors who taught everything. Of course, you had to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that also. But I very much enjoyed it. We had the summer camp. You had to have summer camp back then, which was a 4-week program. We were the first. Our summer camp was at Battleground.
Okay.
And we did some boundary work up there. We did some plane table work. So that was kind of your hands-on experience. And I, graduated and then, started putting out feelers as to where I was going to go to work. I was bent on not staying in Indiana. Did not want to stay in Indiana. I put feelers out all over the place and ended up going down to the Marion County Surveyor's office here in Indianapolis and interviewing, and Joe Prout, who was county surveyor at the time, made me an offer, and I went to work.
So what year did you graduate?
Graduated in 76.
76.
I was a year young, so by Indiana law, I should have been a year after that.
Mm-hmm.
I was we had a class of, I think, 230 in my graduating class. I think I was the 3rd youngest. Everybody literally was a year older than me.
Right. So, who were some of the professors in the program at that time?
So John McIntyre was the lead, and he taught systems and boundary law, property surveying, legal descriptions. Those were his classes. Ken Curtis was the other primary professor, and he taught route surveying and cartography. There were probably a couple others, and then Marks. I think he taught photogrammetry, and then Kivioya was our 4th professor in the program, and he taught instrumentation and some of the calculations and stuff like that.
Yeah. So what states were you considering moving to?
I wanted to go west. I had been to Denver in about 1960. Oh gosh, probably 1966. I went on a road trip with my grandparents. My grandfather had a 63 bright fire engine red Star Chief Pontiac 2-door with a white convertible roof. It was the same grandfather who was the engineer.
Yeah.
And I went on a trip with them. He was doing some consulting at the time, and we went through South Dakota and Wyoming and Idaho and Utah, and I had an aunt who was in Denver, and we ended up there. But that was the first time I'd been out west, and I got to Denver and saw that area, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is where I'm going to be.
Yeah. And
so that's where I was angling on getting out that direction somewhere, but nothing, no offer, nothing came along. And so I took the job at the Marion County Surveyor's office.
So can you elaborate a little bit on the survey camp? I mean, Ryan and I are both, non-Purdue guys, and we've always heard about it, But I was just kind of paint a picture, what that was like. You guys, did you stay there? Or was it?
Yeah, no, you stayed in your, I suppose if I wasn't in a dorm at the time, I had an apartment, but you stayed either, I suppose, in your dorm or in your apartment. Battleground was, 10 miles away. So we would meet over there every morning and have some level of lecture. We might meet at Civil and have some lecture and talk about the plan. What we were going to be doing. We ran some control. We dug section corners. We did some boundary-related work and topo. So it was a whole variety of things that we did. And there were probably, I actually still have the picture. There were probably 25 of us there. And we have a picture of us standing in front of the Battleground sign. Curtis was there the whole time. And McIntyre, I don't remember if Kivy was out there or not, but those two, I think, kind of ran the camp. It wasn't really camp, but that's what it was called.
Right.
And so every day was, I don't remember that every day was something different, but it struck me that as I think about it, it was pretty different. I do remember a number of the things. I remember that the stone monument that's out there sits on ground is sloping a little there. So if you just look at it, it looks like it's leaning. And the whoever was in charge of the Battleground was absolutely convinced that monument was leaning and they were going to have to do something with it. So we made some measurements and found that it was perfectly vertical.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I remember that. I remember one of the days we were running control, we set up a control point at a county road intersection. And in fairly short order, we found that we had set the whole thing up on a gigantic anthill. So that didn't work out too well.
So this was during the summer months?
Yeah, it was in summer.
Okay.
So I basically, you finished the semester, and then I think maybe you just had a week or so off, and then you got right into that.
And how long would that camp last?
I think it was 4 weeks.
Okay.
It might have been 6, but I think it was 4. And I do remember I don't remember if I got the flu. I got sick. I missed like almost a whole week's worth of that, which by all rights I probably, but they let me slide through.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of missing, I did miss out on some things.
Did you imagine where we'd be if they'd have flunked you?
Oh, yeah. I'd be probably teaching physics at some high school in Georgia somewhere.
Or how much more would you have known had you been there for that?
Right.
Well, that's true.
So what kind of student would you consider yourself to be? I mean, were you very serious? Did you find time for some liquid vibations like we're enjoying right now?
I was a serious student. I didn't cut classes. There were people who, well, let's see, you can either read the material or you can go to class, but, you don't need to do both those. No, I didn't read material. I never did homework. I shouldn't say that. I always did homework. I never studied.
Right.
Because I never had to, which actually was a problem for me. I made it through high school, and I was ranked pretty high in my graduating class, but I never studied. I never had to study. I was even though I was a year young, and that didn't do me any favors when I got to college.
Yeah,
because
I know that.
you all of a sudden there were classes where I did need to study, and I basically didn't know how because I never had to. But I was a serious student. Not that we didn't have our fun, because we did for sure. But when it came to classes, I was at class, and I was pretty serious about it.
Mm-hmm. What kind of extracurricular activities at school? I mean, did you regular attend football games, basketball games?
Yeah, went to all the basketball games, the home games. Went to a few away games. Went to the football games until you'd get behind and it was snowing, and then you decided it was time to go back to the dorm and get warmed up in one way or the other. I did play some intramural basketball a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. I had friends. My best friend stayed in the dorm actually, and so I went back over there a lot. And just all the stuff going on around campus. We would go to concerts and dances and get around town. So we had a lot of fun.
Right. Any love stories in that mix?
Well, when I moved up there, I had a girlfriend, and of course that ended about the time I started class. So that went south. But because of her, I met a girl across the hall from her who I ended up marrying, and so yeah, that happened. I got a lot of good friends who we still. I said there's a core group of about 6 or 8 of us who get together, usually a couple times a year. And
right.
We used to go to a game. We'd go to a football game, but the last time we did that, I think was like the 50th anniversary of, I don't know, the Rose Bowl. I don't know. It's a 50th anniversary thing, and the weather was hideous. It was sleeting and snowing, and we were freezing. And this was probably 15 years ago, right? So we were in our early 50s, and we're standing out there and trying to. Underneath the stands, and a bunch of cheerleaders walked by, and they walked up to us because they're having a celebration for this 50th anniversary thing, right? And those guys would have been, 75 years old? Mm-hmm. These cheerleaders walk up, and they're like, hey, are you guys trying to figure out how to get down on the field? And I'm like, how old do you think we are? Anyway. So between the weather and that experience, I think that was the last time that our group went to a game. And what we would do after that is we would still go to Lafayette for a game, but we would go down to Scotty's down on the levee and watch the game at Scotty's.
There you go. A lot warmer.
Definitely.
So were these friends part of the surveying and engineering program, or just
no,
random majors?
One of them was my best friend who was I think an L.Ed major, elementary education. One of them was a geology major. He married one of the other, actually, who became my wife. Her roommate married this guy. His roommate, I forget what she was in, but she did medical administration or something. Another one was education major. She taught high school forever. So it was just the friends, mostly revolved around us guys and these girls who were freshman roommates across
right.
the hall from each other. That's the 4, and and so yeah, we'd go up, and I may go up to. He lives in South Bend, and we'll go up there once a year or so to. Usually the Purdue Club has a trivia thing, and we'll go up there and play trivia and carouse around Mishawaka.
So you said 1976, you graduated. I was born in 1977, just to let you know.
Right.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So, tell us a little bit about what trying to find a job at that time was like. What was the economy like? I mean, did people send job postings to a message board that was tacked up in the hallway? I mean, what are we talking about?
No, I don't think there was anything like that. You looked in the phone book and sent letters. And I don't even know how I got names of companies in Denver. I don't even know how I got that, probably from my aunt at the time. And you just sent a letter. I mean, that was the way it worked. And I didn't hear anything from out there. And actually, I'll credit my mom, who said, oh, you ought to go down to the county surveyor. I'm like, I'm going down to the stinking county surveyor. I don't want to work at the county surveyor in Indianapolis, of all places. And, nothing was stirring, so I ended up calling them and going down, and they were looking for somebody. So
how many letters would you say you sent out?
I probably sent 10.
And how many replies did you get?
I don't remember now, but it wasn't very many.
Yeah.
I think some of them just ignored, and I probably got a couple rejections. I don't recall the economy in '76. I know we had a recession in the 81, 82 time frame. So I don't know if it's just people weren't looking or what was going on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody bit. I didn't get an interview. I didn't go to Denver to interview with somebody and not get hired. That would have been really disappointing.
Right.
So I went down and interviewed with Joe Prout down in the City County building. 1922 was the room at that time. Now they're down with the recorder's office, I think. And Joe made me an offer, and I think my starting salary, are you ready?
Yeah.
Amounted to, well, actually, my first salary, I'll preface and say my first check came in, and I spent hours working through it because between taxes and everything, I'm like, this isn't right. This isn't what he told me. He actually paid me more than what he told me.
Oh. Okay.
And my starting salary was $11,000.
Wow.
Wow.
What's that equal in dollars per hour? I got to see this.
About $5 an hour.
What was minimum wage at the time?
It's probably still what it is now.
That's $5.29.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that he had said I think the offer that he initially made me would have put me in at like 97, I think it was 97.76. Whatever that comes out to is $4 and something probably.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to work there, and that's where I met my first day on the job. It's where I met Rick Miller, and it's where I met Norm Heiselman.
Wow. Some powerful names there.
You're talking powerful names, yeah. Rick was a party chief, and Norm was an instrument operator. And the other party chief, I think, was Bob Wilcoxon, and Bob was there forever. When he left, he had been at the county 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
and probably knew every stone and every section corner in the county multiple times. He was a great resource. But yeah, I remember my first day on the job. It was ugly. I didn't know what I was doing. I actually said when we had a party at Schneider a couple of years ago, and I said something about, Rick Miller probably thought I'm like, what in the world did you just, but I will say that the education was important. I mean, that gave me the means to understand, what I was doing. But, gosh, I went out in the field that first day. I had no idea what I was doing. I could turn an angle, but we were doing some boundary thing, and we didn't have section corner. And I remember Norm kind of taking over and saying, "Well, I'll go down here and check this out." And Rick, and they probably thought, what in the world?
So what in that interview process? What took you from Mom, I don't want to work at the Marion County Surveyor's office to this will work?
Well, he made me an offer. That probably had a big thing to do with it. Yeah. But I like Joe. Joe ended up with some problems. He had to resign the position a couple years later. But I liked him. I liked the people that were working there, and we had a couple crews. It was probably similar to me going to Berry College, which it was a small office. We had two field crews, three people, except in the summer I think we had 4 on a crew. And we had a person who drafted, Wanda Roberts. We had, front office people. We had a first deputy, and Joe and me. So it was very kind of manageable. It was something that appealed to me, going into a massively big company at that time. Just didn't appeal to me any more than as a freshman deciding I was going to go to Purdue, because I just didn't want anything that kind of overwhelming.
So what kind of stuff? I mean, obviously section corners, but at the time was the drainage, because in Marion County the drainage is separated from the county surveyor's office, if I believe. Was that way at that time?
Yes, Unigov went in I think in 1970, so the drainage was already gone. It was at DPW. We did section corners. We also did work for the various departments in the city, and I think they still do some of that. You have kind of at the time. I'm fresh out of school. I don't know the difference, right? But you could look at it now and say, well, why were they doing work for the various departments when the department could hire, Structure Point or American Consulting or whomever? But I did a lot of work for city legal. If there were potential code violations, or maybe there was, I can remember accidents where they needed a survey done.
Measure like how far a liquor store was from a school, that kind of stuff?
I actually did that one time. There was one where the question was, how far this was, the driveway was from an intersection, and what they were doing, timing and all that sort of thing. So we did stuff for DPW. I know I did some surveys for them, but we did stuff out at Eagle Creek. We did a lot of work for what at the time was DEHD, Department of Economic and Housing Development, which fell under Metropolitan Development. Larry Coffey and Dave Witcher, two really, really good guys, and I did a lot of stuff for them in the redevelopment realm, neighborhood redevelopment, that sort of thing. My first testimony was at the county, or through work at the county surveyor's office. And, I don't remember doing any depositions, but I certainly testified in some cases.
Yeah.
So and then a lot of section. I loved the section coroner work, and now that loops back to the history, right? In the land survey systems course at Purdue, we had a book from somebody named Pattison, Pattison, and it was one of those books where every page has more footnotes than text. And that's not an exaggeration. That's how that book is. And I just couldn't. It was just brutally boring to me. But as soon as I got into section coroner work, I realized, oh no, you have to know the history, right? And so that's what turned the corner for me on history. And where I started learning about Indianapolis and the history of Indianapolis way, way, way back when. Actually, we wrote a script and recorded some stuff on the history of Indianapolis, between the mile square and the donation lands. And I'll bet you don't know, by the way, that the guy who platted Indianapolis, Alexander Ralston, which is where Alexander's
right,
and where Ralston's, both those names came from that. He is buried in Crown Hill Cemetery, and his gravestone has a carving of the mile square on it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's worth it's going and looking at it. Yeah.
So, I guess I don't know a lot of the history of Indianapolis. So the mile square would have been carved out aside from the public land survey systems? Yeah,
it's really interesting. So the donation lands, the federal government said they would give Indiana 4 square miles. And they had to sit tight because the surveys hadn't come through yet. And so they ended up giving them, the river goes through, and so it's not just not 4 sections. It's 3 sides on the east side of the river are section lines, but then you get to the west side, and there was, I think, maybe less than a section, and so it's kind of a little weirder over there. But the northeast corner of the donation lands would be the township corner at, I think that's right, at 10th and Shelby. I think that's where that would be. And then the north line of donation lands east of the river would be 10th Street today, or more or less 10th Street. 10th Street wanders around a little bit. The east line would have been that township line. And then the south line would have been, I think probably was Moore Street now. And but the mile square though doesn't tie. It sits in the middle of all that, and it is not tied to the public lands at all.
Right.
In fact, you can look at the mile square, and you can look at the sections and say, so that section corner would have been around here somewhere. Section lines are utterly irrelevant inside the mile square, completely irrelevant. So it was just kind of floating inside there, and then the donation lands, and in fairly short order, they platted the rest of the donation lands. In the mile square, they're squares, and in the donation lands, they are outlots, and they divided the squares into lots, and there was a revision to that fairly promptly, and the mile square plat got revised because of Pogue's Run, and they had kind of just platted over it, and then they decided they should adjust some things to go along the creek, and then the donation lands were platted, just a few years later. It's really interesting stuff working in the donation. I love working in the downtown in the donation lands.
What kind of monuments would they have been setting at that time frame that they created that?
To my knowledge, none. There may have been, to my knowledge, there's no record of any monuments associated with the donation lands or the mile square. The public land survey, of course, the donation lands east of the river were along section lines, and there would have been stakes there at the time. But inside, I don't know that there were any monuments set. I suppose there were, but I'm not aware, and I've never had anybody say anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So what year would they have started replacing, wood stakes with stones in the county? And was there a specification on stone size, type, markings?
No, the GLO the GLO had specifications on stones, and it was by cubic inches, as I recall. But in Indiana, there was no specification. I think the earliest I ever saw, Marion County has pretty good legal survey books, and they're divided into townships, into civil townships. And as I recall, my memory may not serve me well, but I think the earliest stone I ever found documented in the legal survey books was about 1843. Most of the action in Marion County in replacing stakes with stones seems to have been in the 50s and 60s, probably in the 70s and even into the 80s, but I think an awful lot of it was in the 1850s. And Marion County is an interesting anomaly, at least compared to places like Hamilton County, where you can go in there, what is it called, the red books up there, or the blue books, red books, I think. And they'll be very detailed about the stone. It was 8-inch by 14-inch by 10-inch red granite. Marion County, literally, as a true statement, the only description of a stone I ever saw in the legal survey books in Marion County is that it was a gallbuster. And that was spelled, by the way, Gollbuster, set a gallbuster of a stone. Otherwise, literally no descriptions. I remember one stone that was about the size of a football, and I remember one that was a gallbuster. It was probably 2 by 3 by 4, which means it probably was there. And they were like, "Hey, let's put the corner on top of this stone."
So commonly, what were they? I mean,
I would say typically they would be, 10, maybe 10 by 12 in a cross section, and then maybe 18, 24, 30 inches tall, 24, and they weren't regular. Some of them, usually there was a high point, not always, but I would say that would be fairly typical. Maybe 10 inches square and 18, 20 inches tall. That would have been a fairly typical stone.
No physical markings, no cut X's.
I only, in Marion County, I only ever saw one that had physical markings, and Bob Wilcoxon or even Rick might recall others. and Brian Catlin down there now, but we found a center section that had CS carved in it for center of section.
Now, did they put it in the right way, though? Can we...
Well, let me tell you, no, they didn't, actually. And the surveyor in the legal survey even stated how they did it. He said they put it halfway between the east and west quarter corner.
Right.
And when we found it, it wasn't in that, it was off by, 20 feet or something. And the measurements were pretty good all the way around in the legal survey, but the center was not where he said it was, and we concluded it had been moved or something because I think we had the overall distance east to west quarter corner, and it checked pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And yet the stone was like, 12, 15 feet from there. And so we were like, well, we thought it had been moved. We just left it, of course, where it was because it had been there for who knows how long. But.
Right. What year did they start replacing the stones with Harrisons? And was that during your era?
Yeah, that was in my era. I can remember talking with, it was Joe Prout. It was probably Joe still at the time. He was kind of a forward thinker. He had some issues, but he was a forward thinker. And so I went to a CIC meeting, and I said, we're going to start a corner perpetuation program. And I wanted to ask who was there. Now, back then, the people who went to the CIC meetings was like John Schneider and Jake Hall and Dick Stoppelworth and Alan Y. I mean, it was owners of companies.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think Saul Miller probably was there off and on, and Neil Franklin. And so we got choices. All right, we can do the Harrison. And it was 30 and a half inches with the cap on top, and it was big, and but they're expensive.
Was that a commonly known monument at the time?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, or we could go with was basically a plastic one with an aluminum cap on top, which was not near as expensive, so we could buy more of those. And it had a magnet and everything, and so we threw it out and said, here's what we're thinking. We can get more of them. We can put more of them in the ground, but they're not as substantial as a Harrison. And the consensus was, no, we think Harrisons are what we should be setting. Said okay, and so that's what we did.
So did you just order them as you needed, or ordered 10 or 20 in the office at any given time?
Yeah, I think we probably, it's been so long I don't remember, but I'm sure we ordered a chunk of them to get started, and then we probably just ordered them maybe every couple of years. Maybe we'd order some more.
Sure.
So yeah, that was exciting because we were digging the corners, like we would have reference ties to a railroad spike. And it might say railroad spike over stone, or it might not, or it might say stone, and now there's a spike there. And so we dug them, and usually we'd find them. Not always. What we found was if there was a legal survey, and back then the legal surveys were usually of a whole section or a quarter section. And they would do them when they were going to split a quarter section into a half quarter or into quarters. And sometimes there would be smaller parcels, but they were doing the aliquot parts, and they would letter them, and they'd have a letter A, B, C, D, and then there was a description page, and it would say A, and it would say set rock, and then it would say something like one witness found green, which we took to mean one of the original bearing trees was still there, or a sprout of original bearing tree. That was about, that was about the closest you got to actually being able to connect the stone to the original stake.
Right.
Was a statement like that. Most of the time, you didn't even have that. Right. Most of the time, it would just say set rock or set stone, and you just had to, assume that they put it where the stake was because they didn't say, and
What do you think the difference was between, what you had mentioned that Marion County was like versus Hamilton County? Just lessons learned in Marion County obviously would have been settled first, and
yeah, I've often wondered that. It may have been, I can't even offer conjecture. Hamilton County has very detailed information on the rocks and stones that you find up there, and Marion County has virtually none. So whether it was a function of who was county surveyor and they just kept doing it that way, or I really don't know. I've often wondered. It just doesn't make any sense. Why not tell us it was a blue granite rock?
Right.
But they didn't. It's very, very interesting.
So when you guys are digging these stones, you guys doing all the work yourself? DPW involved, or?
Back then, we were doing all the work ourselves, but we would call. We did a lot of work for DOT, Indianapolis DOT, and Harold McKee was one. I don't know that I ever met Harold, but I talked to him on the radio a gazillion times. And we had arrangements where they would come out behind us and patch or do stuff, and part of that was just kind of the politics of who was in the office and who knew whom, and you could get stuff done like that. But we were doing the digging. We had bought a poon jar, and we were doing it ourselves.
The old poon jar.
Yeah.
That one you could lay down on its side. That was nice.
Yeah, and we had a Cobra, but it, I think, had gone on to, had better days at the time. And so I don't think that Cobra, when I worked there, I don't think that Cobra ever worked. And so we bought the poon jar.
So was there a standard, find a monument, set cross ties, dig such a big hole so deep, probe so many? What was that? What was that standard? Do you recall?
It was part of it was a function of the evidence that you had. Sometimes you didn't have great evidence. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we had ties, but everything was gone. Or maybe we didn't have anything other than a legal survey that said set rock. Or what we did find, by the way, was if it said they set a rock, we almost always found it, unless you could tell that the roadbed had changed. But what we also found was that a lot of times they wouldn't even say that. It would just be a letter on the graphic part of the drawing. It would have A, B, C. And what I found was that if there was a letter, they set a stone.
Okay.
And so, but sometimes we didn't have great indication. But I think probably typically we dug maybe a 2x2 hole. Because in Marion County, it's relatively well developed. Even back then, I mean, in the rural areas, you still had fences and road beds and stuff. And so 2x2, and then probing in all the different directions and stuff. And we felt like we could pretty much figure out where we were.
So if you found a spike that no stone underneath, you would replace that with the Harrison?
We would do some checking. We'd look and see, are there other old surveys? Are there records? And we would, as I recall, when we would decide we were going to work in a section or whatever, we would send a letter out to all the companies and say, hey, we're going to be working in this section in this township. If you all have anything, let us know.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'd get something, sometimes we wouldn't. But if we didn't have anything else, no indication to the contrary, we'd put a Harrison where the railroad spike was. And I know that Brian, in the last 15 years or so, has found some that it's like there was some evidence that we didn't get at the time, or didn't have, or didn't find, or whatever. And I think there are a few corners that they have changed. One of the things that I thought was critical was that we tied everything, right? So there's a spike at the surface. We would put cross ties on that. And then you dig down a foot, 8 inches, and you'd find another spike or a rod or a pipe, and you'd tie that. And then you'd keep digging, and then you'd find a stone. And I always thought it was critically important to document that. So we would do that. Found a stone, we set the Harrison, but there was a railroad spike at the surface that was 6/10 north and 4/10 west. So that when somebody come along later and nothing out here is matching the stone. It's all 6/10 by 4/10 off. Well, they can look at the tie sheet and say, there's why.
Right.
Because, people were using a spike.
Reminds me of the old cartoon you'd seen in POB where it had the stone and the rebar over the top that was bent over like this, and then the spike on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I know there were references at one point to a point in a corner in, a couple of them in Pike Township, and one of them ended up being, 18 feet off, and another one was probably a dozen feet off.
Wow.
And we were able to, with what I felt was high degree of confidence, say, that point is not a good point, but you need to keep it, right? Because there's been a lot of stuff surveyed off of that point.
Right.
So, that presents interesting challenges. What do you do then?
So what kind of equipment back in the Marion County era?
Marion County, we had a T2. We may have had two of them. I know we had one T2 and we had T16s.
What was your survey rig? What did you have for a truck?
When I got there, they had two rust-colored Ford vans that were probably circa about 1972 or something. They were not. They were in pretty sorry shape. I got so mad at those guys. I don't remember Rick. Rick probably kept a cleaner truck, but some of the guys, the trucks were just. I finally go, we're gonna have truck inspection every week, right? Because the trucks were just. I couldn't stand it. Partially, I'm a neat freak, but you'd go riding a truck, and it was just a hideous mess. And of course, there's plenty of people. You all know people who keep a clean truck, and people who don't, right? But in fairly short order, we got some Dodge vans. We got some new Dodges. This would have been probably 78 maybe, and so I was there 7 years. And I suppose maybe we got something else during that time frame.
So if you're inspecting the cleanliness of vehicles, I assume you elevated to some sort of management status during that time?
I got hired in as second deputy. So I was running the field crews. Well, I wasn't. I got hired in, and there was another gentleman who was running field crews for probably not even a year. And then he got fired, and this was some of the stuff that was going on. But he got fired, and then I got promoted running the field crews. So, I was in charge of field crews. I was basically in charge of all the work that was being done, and including getting it drafted and everything, and then take it to Joe to sign if it needed to be signed. And then when I got my license, I was signing stuff. And I was in charge of the crews probably after about a year.
What year would you got your license?
1980.
Okay.
I got my license. I was 25 years old.
Nice. So what was that? What was the test like back in those days? Are those the legal description tests?
You had to write a legal description, and I'm sure there were. I know there were multiple choice or true, false, whatever, and you had to write a legal description. It was a number of years later when the state made us quit doing legal descriptions because they said it was too subjective to grade it. And we didn't do them for quite some time until finally I got fed up with it. One time I was on the board, and a few years later I'm like, this is one of the most critical things surveyors do. We have to see if these people can demonstrate competence. I do remember back when Wes Day, and Wes was when we got our separate board in 92, he was on that board. And not a lot of people around probably remember Wes, but he was plant manager at Tycor, Pioneer title, Union title, had the ARB maps, right? And Wes was writing the test and grading it, And he came to me, and he when he retired from the title company, then he worked part-time at Schneider. And most of what he did was he was doing ISPLS stuff and board stuff. And he came to me one time and he said, I need you to check this exam. And I said, well, how come? Because I'll tell you afterwards, I just want you to grade the exam. So the guy had aced the multiple choice, which was 70% of the exam. And you had it, and the legal description was 30 points, 30%. He got, you're both sitting down. This guy got a 1 out of 30.
Oh my!
Wow.
On the legal description. Now I want you to just take a breath and think about a legal description that can possibly have 30 points on it, and you earned 1.
Do we call that individual an LS today?
We can. We can. Because he aced the
The other part.
yeah, so he got a 71, he got a license.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we're like, okay, so we need to do something different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even, how's that even possible? Like to have enough understanding to do everything else, but not be able to write a legal?
No, I distinctly remember that, and what does that description look like?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe he had the word "thence" on it. Maybe it was, I don't know, but 1 out of 30, and the guy got a license.
Yeah.
Of course, I have no idea who it was. I'm hoping he never practiced, but it's disturbing.
So before we move on from the Marion County years, any other questions, Ryan? Do you have anything to add? Do you have anything? I'm going to ask you a really pointed question, and you can not comment to this, but I moved up to the Indianapolis area in 1999 after graduating from VU, and there was always rumors around that Gary Kent was digging a section corner in Marion County and found a stone and screamed out that this is better than sex.
Oh, that was not me.
Well, I'm glad I asked.
I was there.
Okay.
I was there when that happened. We were digging a corner. I was doing a survey. I was at Schneider, and had got hired. I got a call from an attorney, and he said we had a dispute and went to court. They came to an agreement, and both parties wanted you to survey the line. And I said, okay, fine, that's fine, right? That's a whole different story. But it was down off of Belmont, way south, almost all the way to the county line. And I did my research, and there had been a legal survey down there, and they had set stones in the middle of the road. And I did some checking, and the county had dug those and didn't find them. Well, I went out there, and I'm looking and, checking things, and I'm like, I called Bob Wilcox, and I said, I think you guys dug in the wrong place. I think these are there. Because when you look at the road, it's like there's no reason they would have been gone, right? And so we went down there on a Sunday morning due to traffic and stuff, and dug them, and they dug a nice square out and dug down, and within an inch or two of where I told them what it was, there it was. And Bob was sitting on the pavement, his feet dangling in the hole, and he had a wire brush, and he's brushing that stone off, and that's exactly what he said.
We've heard it here now. We got the official story.
That's where it came from. Yep. Yeah.
So during this time, history. I mean, are you reading textbooks? I kind of remember when I was young, just getting in the profession. Every magazine I could get my hands on, I was just absorbing it. I mean, what does that look like for you? Are you rereading textbooks from college? I mean, are you?
Yeah, I got back into Pattison, which so I learned a lot out of that, and we got into the old instructions, Tiffin, and the newer instructions, because just as an example, when in the early instructions, in that last half mile, You set the quarter halfway between. And then later on, they said, no, let's not put a halfway between. Let's go a quarter mile and put that excess or deficiency in the last quarter mile.
Mm-hmm.
And there are places in Marion County where that quarter is halfway between, and there's places in Marion County where it is at 20 chains. And you need to know what they were doing, or you're going to conclude that they're 80 feet off. So getting into the instructions and I absolutely ate that stuff up at the time, and it all revolved around realizing that to do proper quarter perpetuation. I got back in the old legal survey books in Marion County. It was a lot of such interesting stuff there. That caused me to go back and document all of the county surveyors in Marion County, because some of them were better than others, and some of them did a whole ton of work, and some of them didn't do much.
Yeah.
But and Brian still has that. You can go on the Marion County website, and they list all the county surveyors. I really got into that. If I could have just done section corner work, I'd probably stayed.
Mm-hmm.
But at 7 years, there were politics involved, and our one first deputy left, and they hired another first deputy, and I was not enamored with him, and it ended up being political stuff. And I'm like, you know what? My wife was pregnant. I didn't even tell her she was pregnant. I walked into Jack Irwin was county surveyor at the time, and Jack served in that position for 20 some years probably. I walked in one day and said, Jack, I'm giving my two weeks.
Did you have a job or just?
Nope, I didn't. I went home and my wife was like, "You what?" She was pregnant.
Now, was Rick Miller still at the county at this time? He had left and went to Schneider?
Rick had left and went to, so I think he went to Mid-States. I can't remember if he had come to the county from Churchill or he left the county and went to Churchill or went to Mid-States, but he was probably at Churchill, but he had left. He left within a year or so after I got there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Norm left sometime after that. We had good staff. We had good people, generally good people. We had some not so good, but it was a fun group.
So you put in your 2 weeks notice with no job and a pregnant wife. Ballsy move. Now let's get back to, when did the mustache come into play? When was the mustache grown?
I can tell you exactly when that happened. Part of our Purdue group, all right, the geologist and his wife ended up in Houston, and we drove to Houston in my 1979 AMC Concorde. We drove to Houston in my 75. My 75 Opel 1900, and I grew it and started it. I wasn't somebody like we all know people who. I knew a guy in college. He's like, "Yeah, I think I'll grow a beard today," and the next day he had a beard, right? But I started that on that trip, and that would have been, I think, that might have been 70. That might have been 78, somewhere right in there.
When did the Sam Elliott comparison start coming along?
I remember the very first time that happened. I was out in Avon, and I stopped at a dry cleaner out there because we had an office in Avon way back when, and I had a whole boatload of hangers that I didn't need anymore. I'll take them. I know that. I pulled in there, and this young gal came out, and she took the hangers, and she said something like, "You look just like Sam Elliott." And I said, "Oh," it was the first time I ever heard it. I'm like, "Oh, I guess I'll take that as a compliment." And she said, "You should, honey."
All right, so this seems like a good stopping point for part one of our conversation with Gary Kent. We're about halfway through the conversation, so if you'll join us on the next episode, we'll continue the conversation from there.
Thank you for listening to the Hoosier Surveyor podcast, brought to you by the Indiana Society of Professional Land Surveyors. For more information about the society, please visit ISPLS.org, or if you are new to the profession, you can find helpful resources at futureindianasurveyor.com.